Good day, BT clients. We've just gone through a very interesting election where, for the first time since independence, the ANC no longer has an outright majority. This has resulted in a very interesting situation, and we thought it would be a good idea if Thando Gobe, our managing director, were to share his views on how he sees the election results and the future going forward. I must admit, for myself, I am nicely optimistic about what lies ahead, and I'm sure you're going to find Thando's address to you of interest.
Good day. My name is Thando Gobe. I am the Managing Director of Personal Trust. And we thought we would do a short video just to share some of our thoughts post the national elections that we've seen here in South Africa. My short video is going to cover a few things. Firstly, why the outcome of this election is important. Secondly, I'll try to talk to the South African context and just remind us of where we've come from and some of the key issues on the table. We'll confirm what happened in the election and then talk a little bit about what we expect going forward, and touch on the MKP, which is the Mkhonto we Sizwe party we have seen emerge as one of the main winners coming out of this election. On why this outcome is important, I think quite clearly the most important thing that the markets have particularly been interested in is the direction of policy. The outcome of any election should shape broader economic and regulatory policy and the environment, thereby directly affecting investor sentiment and decision making. Policy should also shape the direction of the discussion on the new South Africa and its sustainability. And we mustn't forget that this project of a new South Africa is only 30 years old, and thus still has some way to go before we can really say if it's been successful or not. Moving on to the South African context, I'll touch on firstly just a bit about the fundamentals, which can be seen and expected in any thriving economy. Touch on the South African democracy and what we've seen thus far. Touch on the political beliefs that we see, the judicial transformation, as well as the political players themselves. From a fundamental perspective, it's important to remember that any investor is interested in sound fundamentals. The way I like to look at it is any economy is looking to grow, and so the gross domestic product is important. And so are other measures of progression and growth, but gross domestic product is usually the most common one used. But of course, there are others that are available. And to get good GDP, I think means that you need to see good economic growth. Interest rates are usually influential in that growth, in that lower interest rates usually do allow for better economic growth, as it's an environment where companies can borrow money much cheaper, invest that money, and thereby generate a good return on that cost of equity. But all of this really does hinge on inflation. And so the inflation outlook becomes important, and really the policy to manage inflation and really the focus on that becomes something that the state and I guess any authorities need to be clear on, consistent on, and it's something that the international markets really do have a look at. Obviously, the other part of the inflation, or rather the interest rate story, is not just the cost of borrowing, but obviously the saving rates. You have people in the economy who are saving, and those people obviously would benefit from a higher interest rates. And obviously that becomes an important part of their outlook. But all in all, the fundamentals, economic fundamentals, are important, and I think the markets were looking to see whether we would see a continuation of sound economic principles. And I think anyone who has had criticism about the the South African economy under the ANC would have agreed that at least one of the strong points has been sound and consistent economic policy and fundamentals. Talking a bit about the democratic South Africa, I think we've seen the ANC dominate the government since 1994. There was a government of national unity to start off with, but since then, the ANC really has had the lion's share, securing 50% plus in every election since national elections since then. And I guess for the first time, we felt the consensus was the ANC was going to fall below that. It wasn't clear exactly how much they would get, but certainly the consensus was fall below that. In terms of political belief systems, I think it's important to remember that South Africa, coming out of apartheid, has seen the emergence of a number of different political parties who are all touting their own views. I think South Africa, being a developing country, certainly still politically, is nowhere near having, two or three dominant parties or two or three dominant views. Of course, all these beliefs and positions politically can still be viewed in the traditional way, either the policies being left or center or progressive or even right, which would be the conservative. The other thing to remember about South Africa is that the judicial system, as well as businesses, has gone through major transformations since 1994. Some of the parties have been happy with the progress. Some of the parties have felt the progress is not enough. And certainly some of the parties have voiced their view that transformation is not important at all and is something that is going to hold our economy back. And then lastly, we've seen emerging political players in various shapes and forms. And I'm not going to go into detail, but I think we all have seen that is part of the context and this proliferation of political parties that have come to the fore. So what happened? I think we saw that the ANC fell below 50% as expected. But the big question mark was how the coalitions were going to shape out. We had seen in Port Elizabeth, as well as Gauteng and other parts of the country, Pretoria, etc., coalitions really struggle to deliver any sort of meaningful progress for the electorate. The politicians themselves have squabbled, and some of these coalitions have fallen flat on their faces. And so this was a big worry coming into this election, with the expectation that there would be a coalition government of some sort as to how it was going to shape up. After all the fuss and fighting, and I'm guessing infighting, after all the fuss, the ANC under Ramaphosa's leadership has decided to go for the government of national unity and invited a number of political parties to be part of a government of national unity. And, I think some of us have been quite critical of Ramaphosa and his perceived or our perceived slow pace in which he has moved to implement some of the changes that he has himself pointed out as needing to be done. However, I think he faced a very stark choice. So, on the one hand, he could have teamed up with a Jacob Zuma and an EFF under the leadership of Julius Malema, which clearly wanted a radical shift to the left, or at least that's what the perception is would have happened, or cozy up to the DA, which is perceived to be a white party, which in some circles of the ANC would take the party back. So none of these choices were obvious wins for Ramaphosa. However, I think what we've seen play out, is Ramaphosa resisting, going into a coalition with someone who left the ANC unceremoniously as Jacob Zuma did, and obviously still with his legal troubles that still are playing out in the courts. So that really is what we've seen, and I guess the interest is what happens next and how this is going to be navigated. As an aside, I think it shouldn't be lost on us that the GNU, certainly in my perception, should help relieve funding pressure for new government entrants, and these are the smaller parties whose top leadership, maybe one or two, sometimes more, will now get government positions, and the parties will no longer have to pay their salaries directly. That money can be used for other things within the party, which I think is something that the ANC and the DA have enjoyed for a long time. And I think other parties now should start to see that benefit from a funding perspective as well. So with all this said, what should we expect next? I think we've seen the first round, or what I call round one, being about forming a sustainable government. And as I've said, Cyril and the ANC have chosen to go the route of the government of national unity. They had the NEC's national executive's backing, and obviously now need to sell this to the broader ANC. I think for Cyril also, this is about the fight for the soul of the ANC, given what's happened in the last 5 years, with Jacob Zuma and a few others who have called for, radical economic transformation. Having fought that fight, I think this was a continuation of that battle, fighting for the soul of the ANC. And I think this is something that will continue to play out. I think round two nationally will be about political rhetoric and marketing campaigns. I think we've seen the inclusion of a few more political parties in the government of national unity, and these parties will want to make sure that in whatever portfolios they have managed to get their hands on, those portfolios are performing, and will want to communicate this to the public. Whilst from a political party point of view, this will be anxious times, I think it's good for the national, or for the public at least, because it means that there will be some better traction in some of those portfolios than we've seen in the recent part. And this rhetoric, I think, will last for at least 12 months. Obviously, will come up again going into the next elections, but certainly in the first 3 to 12 months, expect to hear the wins or the quick wins that have been achieved in each of the portfolios, and not just the new entrants. I think the ANC will also be eager to do the same. So that would be rhetoric. But I think importantly, we should expect round three to be about political strategy. I think, as I said earlier, there's been a proliferation of parties, and some of them believe in the same thing and others have slightly different views. But I think, with the government of national unity, there should be some consensus on the big issues that face South Africa. And so I think political parties' strategies should look to be aligned with those issues. And unfortunately, for the parties themselves, this will also spill into what I believe will be a fight for positions, because individuals ultimately drive party direction, and this will last anything up to 24 months, where parties certainly have conferences, like the EFF is going to have a conference later this year, and other parties a bit later. The impact of the GNU will be felt within the political parties themselves. So a little bit about the MKP. The MKP is the latest breakaway party from the ANC. We saw Bantu Olomisa leave very early on. I think Mandela was still around. We saw Cope when there were issues around Thabo Mbeki and Musiwa Lekota and a few others unhappy with what the ANC had done there. And obviously you saw the EFF after the expulsion of Julius Malema and co. So this is not new. The Jacob Zuma's initiative, of forming an MKP, and I think it has surprised everyone and really taken the stage by storm in the numbers that they've achieved at the elections. The challenge for them will be, can they build a party? And interestingly, we've seen what I initially thought would happen in 12 months' time, but it's starting to happen within the EFF. And this makes sense because there's an election or at least there's a conference at the end of the year where Floyd Shivambu has now left and effectively moved over to the MK party. And this morning I saw something that another top member had also left. So that obviously is a win for the MK party, but also I think a consequence of the government of national unity, where the rumor now is that there's obviously just unhappiness at how Julius Malema behaved in and around the the discussions with the ANC, discussions which were allegedly sort of entrusted with, Floyd Shivambu was entrusted with, but ultimately not agreeing with Julius Malema's stance. And this is part of the consequence. So this is part of the posturing and I guess the strategic maneuverings within the parties to make sure that the story that the parties are able to tell at the next national elections is something that that makes sense. So the challenge for the MKP is whether or not they can build a party. So what does all of this mean for you, personal trust clients and your portfolios? In our view, the election outcome is net positive. We think the government now is much better positioned than it was 12 months ago to effectively improve the state of the country for all South Africans. We are aware that risks and challenges remain. So this is by no means trying to say that we should all log off and go to the beach. Certainly there are challenges, and one of the ones that is currently emerging is certainly the security risks. And we're seeing what looks like the emergence of a mafia state. There's action that apparently has been taken in the Eastern Cape. But all of these issues don't only affect the poor, don't only affect the rich, I think they affect all of us. And so those risks and challenges remain. And others, one can talk to Eskom, Transnet. There's a whole lot of work that still needs to be done to make sure that we can maximize our growth and really start to tackle the issues of unemployment and poverty, which really is really at the heart of what South African governments should be trying to address. Then the last thing, I guess as I mentioned, I think political parties I expect to continue to be dominated by personalities. We continue to see that in the EFF, but it's not just the EFF. I think within the ANC that will be a challenge. I think the Democratic Party is still, the Democratic Alliance is still, perceived to be under the leadership of one of two, Helen Zille and co. You still have the UDM being strongly led by Bantu Olomisa, and so on and so forth. So these personalities have dominated South African political landscape for over 20 years, sometimes 30 years, and I think that one expect that to happen. Obviously, from the personal trust client perspective, what we would like to see is all of these states, organs, municipalities, and arms of state being run more and more independently of the personalities, so that the services that are delivered to South Africans are not affected by who's in power and what their short-term policies might be. So with that, we just thought we'd share our thoughts on the outcome of the elections. We hope that this adds a bit of color and really starts to share with you how we're viewing the outcome of the elections and really the thinking that's now going into constructing your portfolios as we go about trying to make sure that we can deliver and continue to competently manage your retirement capital. Thank you.